You might have heard that Maduro supposedly won re-election in Venezuela with 51% of the vote against 43% for the opposition's like fourth choice candidate. And I have a bridge to sell you if you believe that. Now, I know exactly what like this collective of
I'm consuming
12-year-olds who have replaced their very identity with like treating politics as a subculture in which they've dedicated themselves. They're mostly Americans who have dedicated themselves to self-hatred. And the way that they do this is to like with zero analysis outright support, like wholeheartedly deep throat support of anyone who the USA is against for geopolitical reasons.
I'm consuming.
And for them, like all that they know how to do is say, that's CIA talking point, State Department talking point. Literally anything you say, regardless of how true it is, about anyone who is a target of the US or
I'm consuming.
any government that has been targeted by the US. And that it was basically these people now have decided that, just by the way, in exactly the same way Jackson Hinkle has, that Nicolas Maduro is based and he won the election fair and square no matter what. And somehow the objective disaster of his entire presidency is not actually an objective disaster at all, and he's still overwhelmingly popular in Venezuela, which literally is the least tenable narrative I have ever heard in my entire life and that you will ever hear in your entire life. But for a large number of you, you're far too stupid to even realize that. In every other election in Latin America, the voting sheets for each polling station are nearly immediately released to the public and uploaded to a central website. In Venezuela, this hasn't happened still, when it's supposed to have already happened. I fucking wonder why. And it doesn't matter if you say, oh, but the opposition are fascists and bad and supported by the US or whatever. Okay, and the fact of the matter is that Venezuelans have been negatively polarized by the complete idiocy of Maduro and his government for the last 10 years. That he has brought this upon himself. He has brought this upon his own government. It's not just them either. Maduro, since 2020, has been denounced even by the Communist Party of Venezuela, who were a founding member of the Chavista coalition back with Hugo Chavez. Since 2020, he has been repressing them just as he had previously done with the right-wing opposition, for mild criticisms of him, mild criticisms. The repression of them started, by the way, because Maduro started a program of austerity in 2020, and they criticized it. Venezuela, in fact, over the last 3 or 4 years or so, has been marked by austerity, has been marked by the very same sort of neoliberalism, not aligned with the US, of course, but still neoliberalism, that Maduro supposedly denounced and that his supporters supposedly love about him, but they don't know anything about him. They don't know anything about Venezuela. They're 12-year-old Americans. Maduro is literally sending gendarmes and police after fucking anyone who publishes videos of what they're doing to people on social media. They have at this point disappeared or killed more people than Argentina's dictatorship did. Easily. Not even close. At this point, I don't give a single fucking shit what these fucking American children say about me because they're little fucking drone morons. Anyone who knows a single Venezuelan, not one of you do, you will see them uploading a billion fucking things because the Venezuelans who live abroad are being sent videos by people who in Venezuela who will get tracked down by the police the second that they post this shit. And I'm not going to bother citing anything because the people who don't believe me won't accept anything that I cite anyway. They're going to call it CIA, NED, State Department propaganda. So what's the fucking point? No matter what you do, you can't fucking win because the only source that they will accept is tweets from fucking based Marx 1989 2129 or whatever the fuck on Twitter. And you can't blame fucking everything on sanctions. You can't blame everything on the US. Chavez had the same opposition from the US. Chavez had an attempted coup against him by the US. His term was incredibly successful, regardless of that. Imperialism, as bad as it is, as much as it is to blame, is a constant that you can deal with. It's something that you can predict, that you know is going to happen, that you can account for. Chavez did so. Maduro has not. There is a reason why it is Maduro's government that began the actual economic crisis in Venezuela and not Chavez. Because his mismanagement has been brutal and horrible. He is not the same politician as Chavez was. And yes, Cuba has gone through the same thing like this 1,000 times over. And nothing like this has ever happened. The protests in Cuba a couple of years ago were in fact the first mass protests in Cuba ever. In 50 years. And those of you who are like, honestly, I don't know There's so many fucking 12-year-olds who are like, oh, Maduro is a based Marxist socialist Chad. Dude, he's a generic national capitalist, economic nationalist. That's what he is. Or what he was, rather, because lately he's been delving more into austerity. Like nationalizing oil, which was already mostly nationalized, but having nationalized oil and using it to fund social programs is not what socialism is. It's not what Marxism is. I don't know where the fuck you guys got that idea. What Venezuela had to do was use the oil money to not just to fund social programs, but also to diversify the economy. Because oil is incredibly easy to fuck with, incredibly easy to sanction. But he didn't, and that's exactly what happened. And since then, he has just clung to power to the point that basically everyone inside the coalition who is not one of the diehards has turned against him. His own coalition, the original Chavez coalition, which was made up of everything from communists to left of center centrists. This reminds me like the contrast between this and the claims of fraud in Bolivia, if you remember from 2019. In Bolivia, the results from each voting station were released within 2 or 3 days to the public, even though it was Bolivia has paper voting. In Venezuela, with electronic voting, they were not released. Still haven't been released. And I'm not exactly sure how that doesn't cause you any suspicion, how you think that's normal when it's, in Venezuela, this has never had to happen before. And by the way, the last real election in Venezuela was the 2018 congressional elections. Hold on. This was the election that made Maduro realize that he had to start fucking with things. I'm not sure if Maduro, I would say Maduro probably won in 2018, just barely, though only after a lot of fuckery, without having to do actual fraud. It was more like he just sort of impeded the opposition's ability to run fairly. And in 2016, there was a massive victory for the opposition in the parliamentary elections. They won 56% to 40%. After that, things only got worse. Yet we're expected to believe
communism is based
that 8 years later, Maduro's popularity has shot back up to the point where he actually won an election rather than just getting worse from there. It was the point where Maduro really realized, because he only won his first election after the death of Hugo Chavez by a thread.
Communism is based.
And this was like the wake-up call where he realized he wasn't going to be able to keep winning elections as Chavez basically had them locked in. Chavez crushed every election, but Maduro is not Chavez, obviously.
Communism is based.
He won in 2013, barely. And this was before he fucked everything up. And now we are expected to believe that he's back to winning by margins of around like 8-9%. You have to give me a fucking break. Seriously. Things have only gotten worse. He's only gotten less popular. More and more parties have only been leaving his coalition. He's apparently still beating the opposition by 10%. Like, there's a certain point where you just have to fucking admit that you're a pro-fraud. Like, just say it, okay? Like, it's okay. I don't give a shit. Like, I would gladly support a dictatorship that was better than some shitty neoliberal right-wingers in an electoral democracy. But can you say that? Just say it. Admit it. Say it. I can say it. Why can't you? Why do you have to pretend that he's winning? It's the same thing that these people do when they like pretend that Cuba has like a real legitimate democracy where anyone is allowed to run under any platform they choose, but that's not true. I don't care though. I acknowledge that because it's better than the alternative. It's better than the American siege against the Cuban system succeeding. Thing is though, Venezuela doesn't have a system like Cuba. What Venezuela had was they lucked into having one single good leader who then died. And unfortunately, the movement that he had created was then put into the hands of an incompetent who was not even half the leader that he was, not even half the politician that he was. And things have gone downhill ever since. And this was posted 35 minutes ago. The president, or is it prime minister of France, calls for the publication of all of the electoral results in Venezuela, the real electoral results, which they still haven't done, by the way, highly irregular. Now, the opposition has claimed that they have a lot of these electoral results. I don't know how they would claim to have gotten them. I don't know if that's true or not. But their results, which they claim to have gotten directly from the servers or by paper records or something, I'm not exactly sure, have been published online. Even fucking Maduro's previous allies like Cristina Kirchner are saying, I ask you, for the legacy of Hugo Chavez, to publish the electoral acts in Venezuela. There comes a certain point where, like, you guys just have to fucking admit that you don't give a shit about anything but the political subculture on the internet that you're a part of. Like, these are the same people who will outright, for example, support the fucking theocratic government of Iran. Not just, like, you know, hope that they beat the US in their geopolitical conflicts. No. They outright, like, enthusiastically support them when they post, like, fucking Ayatollah Khomeini fan cams. Like, there's a certain point where you have to admit that you need a fucking hobby, a life, and a job. And that is it. What would be best for Venezuela? I don't know. I don't have the answers. But I certainly don't think it's good for Venezuela that you have a government that is easily it's a dictatorship at this point, which I'm not necessarily 100% against, you know, just having a dictatorship. But what I am against is the fact that they are mass murdering people. They've killed at least 100 people so far, imprisoned thousands more for posting, like, images to social media of police brutality in the streets and stuff like that. They have, for the last 4 years, been oppressing communists in Venezuela. I haven't looked at it yet, but I guarantee if I bring up the Communist Party of Venezuela Twitter account, they're going to be fucking screaming about this right now. The Communist Party of Venezuela, as I said, these guys are fucking fanatical Chavistas, or they were at least beforehand. That pinned tweet is calling for protests against the government. Like, when is the fucking point that you guys realize that there is no one in Venezuela, aside from the party diehards, who are even remotely supportive of the government? The fact that so many people are against Maduro, for one, the fact that normal people have been negatively polarized against him is in large part due to his own political incompetence. For two, the fact that many of his previous allies are against him is entirely due to him literally fucking turning against them for the most mildest of criticism as he turned to austerity. The fact that you are for him comes from nothing but the fact that you're a fucking dumb kid who knows nothing about what you're talking about at all. And I want you out. I don't want you to watch my channel anymore. I want you to leave. You're a kid anyway. You don't fucking work. You don't have money to give me. I don't want you here. Get out. You have to fucking stop treating politics like a team fucking sport. No one should ever have your unconditional support for eons, forever. You should support ideas. You should support politics, not people, not parties. But you don't get that. Because for you, this is a joke. This is just for fun. This is a hobby. It's not something where people's lives and well-beings are on the line. It's not something where those who may come from a positive legacy can fuck things up and make people hate them. For you, that's not even a possibility. You just have to uncritically support that person forever. And that's why I want you out. That's why I want you out of my audience forever. Thanks. It's pretty fucking clear. I would say at least, obviously, this isn't 100% based on the fact that they have not released the electoral results of each polling station as they usually would, is they are manipulating them and then they're going to release them after they're done doing so to make it look like Maduro won when he didn't. Oh, so here is what I was talking about earlier. Hold on. I'm not done yet, actually. Here is an article about... Now, the people who I'm talking about here are just going to say, this is actually a CIA State Department shill, whatever. But the opposition claimed to have obtained 24,000 polling station results, and they released them. Now, I don't know how they got these. I don't know if they're real or not, but I will say that it seems incredibly fucking unlikely they would have been able to fake 24,000 polling station results and release them to the public in literally a day or two after the elections. That seems improbable. I would assume that if they're real, they would have obtained them by, like, polling station workers taking, like, pictures of them and sending it to them and stuff like that. But according to the 24,000 polling station results that they claim to have obtained, that candidate would have received 6.8 million votes and Maduro would have only received 3.1 million. Of course, this is only about 25% of the total votes, give or take. At least they claim to be. But in the same regions, the government is claiming that Maduro had 6 million and the opposition had 6.4 million, the opposition had 5.3 million. So there's clearly something weird going on here, especially given the delay in releasing the official results for each polling station. And I mean, look at the polls, the pre-election polls. Contrast them to, say, now obviously polling in Latin America is not exactly 100% accurate, but there's a certain point where you have to be like, okay, literally every single poll gave the same exact overwhelming defeat. You know, there's not that much, you know, how far could every single polling organization in all of Venezuela be off here? Every single poll had a practically overwhelming defeat for Maduro. Let's compare this, for example, to the Bolivian election, which also had very questionable polling organizations releasing bullshit. So the 2020 Bolivian election, which resulted in a pretty large victory for Mas, had things like almost neck and neck, like half of the polls saying that Mas would win, half of the polls saying that Áñez would win, or that the other opposition candidate, Mesa, would win in the second round. And then Mas ended up winning by, what was it? I think it was like 15%. They got 55% of the vote. They won by a lot. The opposition vote was divided too, but they won in the first round, 55% of the vote. So the margin of error, like between these, clearly, obviously the Venezuela polls are biased, as they always are. They're all like, the margin of victory is so massive, whereas in Bolivia, the biased poll still had things fairly close. And a lot of them even gave Mas the victory still. So there's a clear difference in the margin of error here. It's massive in the case of Venezuela. And there has to be at least some truth to it. At least some truth to literally 20 different fucking polls all showing practically the exact same massive defeat for Maduro. So if you genuinely believe this, I don't know what to say, man. I don't know what to say. Like, you don't need any proof to believe it. You don't need any evidence to believe it. So it's not like any evidence that it's false is going to convince you that you're wrong either. You didn't get to your conclusion based on anything aside from basically this being a subculture hobby for you. So I doubt that you're going to change your mind based on anything. So yeah. I mean, there's not really much more to say about the subject right now. They are murdering people. They are imprisoning people for speaking out against them. These are facts. There are very clear videos of this happening everywhere. I'm not going to show them on stream, for one, because I would get fucking banned from YouTube, and for two, because in many cases, the people who are uploading this are mysteriously having their accounts deleted and disappearing. And the fact that people seem to not notice this or just ignore it either shows that they do not actually follow anyone from Venezuela or have any friends or anyone from Venezuela, or they're just actually ignoring them. The second one is worse, but the first one is still bad. Maduro has, through his failures and his subsequent inability to accept defeat afterwards, to accept the fact that he has, in a crisis that is in large part due to his own making, though obviously not entirely due to it, due to the US actions against Venezuela for 2 decades now, his inability to accept his own failures and to basically do everything possible to stay in power, regardless of the fact that he personally is a huge fucking reason why things have gone so badly. He is in huge part to blame for what is happening here. When you look at the fascist opposition and you say, oh, but they're fascists, but they're supported by the US, blah, 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 how can you not blame him for part of that? How can you not blame him for being such an incompetent buffoon of a leader that he enabled the space for fascism to grow in this sort of way? I think it's weird that you can blame Biden for that, but you cannot blame Maduro for it. If you compare this to other countries like Bolivia, fascism there was a marginalized movement that had to take power in a military coup. It was never legitimately popular, and the 2020 election showed that resoundingly. The fact that the opposition has become quite popular in Venezuela, even despite the fact that there are massive amounts of fascists among them, is because of the fact that people, everyday normal people, just see their country going to ruin, and they see like 20% of their population immigrating, and they're like, okay, this is the alternative that we've got. I don't know much about politics aside from the fact that these guys who are in power right now seem to be fucking up our country. I'm going to support them now. It's also very funny to me that a lot of the people who like support Maduro uncritically are like the American PATSOK types who say that like veterans are victims of circumstance and you can't blame them for it. Yet apparently we have to like blame Venezuelans living on like 50 cents per day, who don't have the time to think about politics that much, that they will just support any kind of change after the present government fucked things up so bad that they're driven to that sort of thing. Anyway, that's all. CIA, my paycheck is due now.